beloved pupils and parents out there. I remain your class teacher, Mr. Oga Joseph. Today in our class, we are looking at social studies. Social studies. And on social studies, we'll be looking at a very interesting topic known as gender discrimination. Gender discrimination. Gender what? Discrimination. Now, gender discrimination as a topic we are looking at today has been a very worrisome topic we face in our society today. Before we start, we'll be looking at, first of all, what gender is. What gender is. Alright. In our homes, as individuals, we belong to different genders. We have the male and the female at home, isn't it? Alright. Now, gender is simply when one is either a male or a female. So, gender simply tells when one is what? A male or what? A female. What did I say is the meaning of gender? I said that gender simply tells when one is what? A male or a female. That's what gender is. When one is what? A male or a female. Now looking at the word discrimination. Discrimination. Now, in our home, for instance, people tend to suffer different kind of discrimination as the case may be. I witnessed a situation where some people are given better portion of meal than the other simply because of what? A particular reason known to their parents. Now, all of these preferences are what causes what? Discrimination. Now, relating it to today's topic, gender discrimination. Gender discrimination arises when people are denied their access and rights to resources. Gender discrimination arises when people are denied their right and access to resources. When people are denied their right and access to resources because of their gender. Let me write it on the board. Alright, on the board here we have the definition of our topic, gender discrimination. Remember I said that gender simply tells when one is a male or a female. Gender simply tells when one is a male or a female. Now, gender discrimination arises when one is denied the rights and access to resources simply because of their gender. Gender discrimination arises when one is denied of the right and access to resources simply because of their gender. Now, in some cultures, most females are not allowed to inherit some of the properties of their late parents, simply because they believe that women do not have the right to inherit these properties. Therefore, allowing all of these properties to their male children, which is not good. Now, so many people have fallen victims to all of this discrimination. Some cultures also forbid the education of the female children. Believe with me that in the olden days, most of our female parents were not allowed access to qualitative education, thereby allowing only the male children to have access to education. That is why we can have most educated people as male. Now, in our modern society, we are expected to discard all of this and bring about what? Gender equality. Now, looking at this gender discrimination, which we say that arises when one is denied the right and access to resources simply because of their gender. Gender tends to exist in different forms. Gender tends to exist in different forms. For the course of this lesson, we'll be looking at the 4 forms of gender discrimination. 4 forms of gender discrimination. Alright. Looking at forms of gender discrimination. Forms of gender discrimination. Gender discrimination exists in different forms or different areas. Some of the areas which gender discrimination occurs are what we are going to list right now. So we'll be listing the 4 areas gender discrimination tends to occur. Number 1 of this. Now, the forms of gender discrimination we are talking about are listed on the board. Like I told you, for the course of this lesson, we'll be looking at 4 forms of gender discrimination. So we have number 1, politics. Number 2, education. Number 3, inheritance. Number 4, employment. Now, in all of this, gender discrimination tends to occur in our various society. Beginning from politics now. In politics, for example, in most of our societies, taking Nigeria as a case study, most females are not allowed to participate or contest into very important positions. Now, with the belief that women are not to be heard. Women are not to be heard. This has actually influenced discrimination among this gender in our society today. That is why most political positions are being occupied by the male rather than the female. Then, looking at number 2, the education. Like I said, in the olden days, most females were not allowed to access quality education, with the belief that they are mere female, so therefore might not function effectively in the educational aspect. They were allowed to carry out farming activities and care for their younger siblings. Now, this has actually led to the low output of female graduates before now. So, this discrimination has affected the life of many women in the olden days. Looking at number 3, which is inheritance, which I explained before, that most culture forbids their women children from inheriting the late properties. Now, like I said, most children are not allowed to inherit properties of their late parents. Not just late parents. Most females are not even given much properties from their loved ones, simply because of their gender. Now, the inheritance of property tends to favor the male gender more than the female gender. Inheritance of properties tends to favor the male gender more than the female gender. Remember, like I said before, in some culture, there are some certain cultures that this inheritance favor the female gender than the male gender. So don't expect it to be the same. So this is a major form of gender discrimination. Looking at number 4, employment. Employment. Now, in the case of hiring or employing people to work in most industries or establishments, as the case may be, This establishment, during their process of recruiting people, some establishments tend to favor a particular gender. Some establishment tends to favor what? A particular gender in the process of recruiting workers. There are some establishments who believe that recruiting male staff will be better for the establishment, believing that the job description there should be better carried out by the male. Now, in some establishments, their belief is that female workers do better than the male workers. Therefore, they tend to recruit what? The female workers more than the male workers. Adding that female workers can actually contribute greatly to the growth of the establishment by what? Exercising or bringing their connection in place, or their awareness to put in place with the establishment in order to grow faster. Most banks too tends to hire what? Female bankers than the male bankers. So this discrimination, or this form of discrimination, is experienced almost everywhere in our society today. So we have been able to discuss what? The 4 forms of gender discrimination. And we begin from where? The politics, education, inheritance, and employment. Alright. Wait. Alright. Now we have been able to highlight the 4 forms of gender discrimination as listed here. Then we went further to write down the explanation to these forms of gender discrimination. Like I said, that in politics, in some societies, it is believed that women are not to be heard but seen. As a result of this belief, women are not allowed to participate in politics. The same thing in education, which I said in some societies, women are denied access to education. For instance, in the past, most young women were not allowed to go to school. Inheritance, we have also discussed, which we say that some cultures do not permit a woman to inherit a deceased person's properties. Employment, we say that employment opportunities in some organizations favor men over women and vice versa. Alright, now for the sake of this lesson, we will stop here for today, having talked about gender discrimination, looking at the meaning of gender, the meaning of what? Gender discrimination, and the forms of gender discrimination. So in our next class, we'll be looking at what? The consequences of gender discrimination, and also the solution to gender discrimination. So for today, we'll end here and we'll take a little assignment. In our homework, we are looking at what? 2 questions here. So you are expected to do what? Tell your teacher what you understand by gender discrimination. After that, you list and explain 4 forms of gender discrimination. So please do this homework and submit to your teacher. Thank you for having me. I remain your host teacher, Mr. Joseph. Please stay safe. Thank you.